So please, everybody give Dave a warm up.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, like you said, follow that. I was sort of led to believe this was a fairly serious event. Kind of, how wrong was I? So just a little bit about myself to start with. I've never been here before. My name's Dave Livesey. My background, totally non-technical. I've got a biology degree for what it matters. I got into project management way back in the late 90s and very quickly got very frustrated with how hard it was to do very theoretically simple things. So I decided there had to be an easier way, and this was while I was living in New Zealand. It was just when sort of cloud productivity software was kicking off. So started off doing Google Apps and Office 365 type implementations for reasonable sized companies. And more recently, I've moved back here to Leeds with BJSS. Today, I want to talk about mapping, which was something I moved into once I got bored of doing email and calendar all the time. No? There we go. So why all the fuss? Geospatial mapping used to be really difficult to do. Traditionally, very waterfall type methodology, massive barrier to entry. If you wanted to do anything with a mapping data set that you might have had with location information in it, you'd have had to buy infrastructure, you'd have had to spend a lot of time and effort going out and defining requirements, usually with people with PhDs and propellers on their heads going and working out some very strange bits and pieces as to, using words that no one else understands and getting paid an awful lot for it. So they were happy. Then you need infrastructure. So you got a lot of tin, you're putting in wires, you're doing all sorts of long lead time information, long lead time work to get the information out there, to get the information somewhere you can do. Then you had some kind of mapping platform that you'd have to go and buy from one of the big vendors, which was a lot of men with +4s going up hills with theodolites and taking measurements of mountains and how high they were and what they looked like and all that kind of stuff. Not terribly interesting things. Then weeks of coding. You see where I'm going with this. It was very, very waterfall. So what happened? Didn't know there was animations on this deck. Forgot about that. Sorry about that. Kind of a perfect storm. Global cloud computing came along, essentially put a supercomputer on everyone's desk. You started getting API-driven development. You started being able to put these building blocks together and do interesting things with them without needing a doctorate in mapping. And more recently, in the last few years, the big buzzwords of big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, analytics, all those things are starting to come to the forefront. The APIs are going out there. You're starting to be able to do some very clever stuff. In mapping specifically, there was a lot of effort put into specifically the data sets. Google's the one that most people know about, Google Maps. Apple Maps have tried. They have had some issues, like trying to make you swim the channel to get to France and things like that. But recently, Apple are doing things with drones, for example. Apple drones sounds a lot more interesting than it really is. We're not talking the Terminator army here. We're talking some quadcopters flying around taking high-res imagery. Google have the cars, as you well know. What's less well known is they also have an air force. Again, it's less interesting than you think. It's a few small planes taking high-res imagery, but it's still pretty impressive. You've got 2 or 3 vendors putting low Earth orbit satellites up. So at some point, the prospect of real-time Google Earth is out there, which is scary for some people when they don't want their wife to know where they are, for example. And then very recently, you've got the wearables, you've got the post-PC age, you've got the Internet of Things. Just about everything that you wear and use now has a chip in it and a location associated with that, from your watches and your tablets and your devices and your phones and all that to your toasters now and your light bulbs. I'm not quite sure why you need to know where your light bulbs are, but So what does that mean? Mapping's now kind of cool. You can do quite funky things with just the consumer APIs that you can get to without paying any money at all. It's commoditized and it's accessible. You don't need to be a doctorate. You don't need to have a degree in how to deal with GIS software in order to do anything useful. Geo's now embedded in just about every application you have. You have really useful things like a little one I found recently called Glimpse, where you can send someone your location for half an hour helps you meet them in a town centre. They can just go, oh, he's over there. Okay. APIs offer everything from map tiling to geocoding to worldwide points of interest, and it's really easy. But part of the problem is our brains can't yet process the sorts of things that we can do. We've got all this data, we don't know what we can do with it. So, quick pop quiz. On Street View, you can look at anything in the world. You can go see Machu Picchu, you can look at the bottom of the ocean. Do you want to know what the number one thing is that people look at? Their own house. I know what my house looks like. I don't need to go on Street View to look at my house. I can go home. It's much better and a more recent picture. But that's the symptom of not being able to understand what you can actually do these days. Now, store locators is kind of the hygiene factor. We had the pyramid before, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If there's one of those for geospatial, store locators are at the bottom. You need to know where your people are and how to get to them. That's kind of the basics. But if you get your users and your customers excited about this, you can come up with all sorts of other things. Just to whip through these real quickly, these are all various clients I've worked with in the past. This one was logistics. DHL did a massive piece of work with all their trucks and so on, where they can do a lot of back office stuff to show, do analytics and route planning, all those sorts of things. Plus, they can front them up to their customers. This one is representing retail and customer analytics. If you're putting in a ERP or a CRM system and you've got address data in there, you can target marketing. You can decide where your next store should be. You can look at where stock levels are, all those sorts of things. You've got various utility ones. That one was quite an interesting one, which was company did overflies of their utility lines, their power lines, with high-resolution imaging, and then they did color analysis on that. If there was too much green, they needed to get the helicopters in there to trim the bushes. Organ delivery. They kind of need to get there on time. So real-time traffic APIs, things like that, really impressive, really up-to-date use of the APIs that now exist. Bottom left is my son, being a pillock, but fundamentally, it's about looking after the more vulnerable members of society. The ability to have a phone or a watch that has location information in it is quite a powerful one. An example would be a dementia trust that I worked with who, they have patients and clients who have a habit of sort of wandering off and getting a bit lost. And being able to actually find them without needing them to have that ability is quite an impressive thing. So what does that mean for you? I put those up there just because I really want an Echo for Christmas. Apart from that, with the extra APIs that are starting to come out, I recently went to the Google Next conference and they were talking about their natural language API and how you can do things with that to just have real voice queries. So you could say, you could build a piece of software. I say quite easily, this is me from a non-technical background. My devs get really upset when I do this. Oh, it's easy, it's just UI, isn't it? But you could get something that says, tell me where the best place to put this new hospital is based on demographics, and all of a sudden, you haven't got to be able to even do user interface manipulation and that sort of thing. You just talk to it. Excuse me. So I suppose the fundamental takeaway on this is that this stuff's now easy. There are bits of software out there that mean you don't actually have to do any coding at all. I don't have any affiliation with this company, but there's a thing called CartoDB, for example. You can drag and drop your data set in there in a CSV format, and you can start articulating that on a map and doing analytics with it without actually having to do anything else. No coding. You can just start doing really cool stuff. So put it in front of your users. Get them, they're the experts on what they need to do. Get them working on it, and you might be surprised at the results. And that's me. Thank you.